Welcome to the Spent the Rent podcast. I am your host, Patty Rose. My guest today is the chair of the Democratic Party of Lane County, Chris Wig. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Patty. It's good to be back.
We have a lot to talk about. I took a week off, and the world has fallen apart in 10 days. So,
thanks for taking that week off, man.
Yeah.
See what happened.
Yeah, I figured I was going to be hitting a lot of election coverage. Pretty big. My last episode was great. I interviewed Andrew Kallick. He's running for Congress. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Next week, I'm going to have Doyle Canning on. I'm trying to do my best to get some of these unknown candidates some coverage so that people know, who to vote for. And it's just there's so little coverage for this kind of stuff. So I'm doing the best I can. So first, I want to talk about Russia. Everyone starts by saying Ukraine. I'm calling it as it is, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Because everyone says Ukraine, the war in Ukraine, like they're guilty of anything. It's been 10 days and it's been extremely hard to watch the last few. It seemed like it started out kind of bungled, and now it looks like the Russians are attacking apartment buildings and have taken over control of a nuclear power plant. Whew, it's pretty wild. So let's just get into it. What are your thoughts on it?
Well, the first thing that I think is the real. So the micro story and the macro story, right? Like the first line story is the heroic defense of Ukraine by the people. That is, they're ready to fight to the death, man, and that is some real baller courage and conviction, and that I wish that it didn't come to that, but my heart is with them. Absolutely, my heart is with them. But the macro story, of course, and the big picture is that this is the latest manifestation of the rise of authoritarianism in the 21st century. That we see it with ascendant power in China. We're seeing Russia deploy its hard power, I think, in like a last gasp effort to, prevent the hegemony of liberal democracy. And we see it inside of Western countries that are ostensibly democracies, right? Like we've seen some stuff in Poland over the last few years where a far right party took control of the government. They are standing up to Russia. So maybe the democratic urge is stronger there than we had thought. Hungary is very similar, where they have had ostensibly a democracy that was taken over by a more authoritarian leader. Not that they still have elections, of course, and that Hungary is standing with the European Union as well. And so I think that much ink has been spilled and many teeth have been gnashed about the twilight of representative democracy in those nations throughout the EU. Brexit is a good example. And then here in the United States with the rise of Donald Trump. And that I think that what we are seeing with this, unified front, a united front and stand from the Western powers is proof that democracy is not dead, and that the liberal, that classical liberal commitment to democracy is strong in the 21st century as well. And I think that we're up to the task. And so I'm really proud of Joe Biden's leadership in this moment, that he is hitting all the right notes. There's not any right notes, right? But he's doing the best that he can, and that our response is unified. And so I see things like some of the sanctions. I'm not a foreign policy expert. I work in the state of Oregon on, state and local elections and some federal stuff, but I'm pretty pleased with how the sanctions have been going. I'm pretty pleased with, seizing the mega yachts and stuff. Those are pretty interesting. And that, make those oligarchs feel it where it hurts in their wallet and their status. The last thing I'll say about it is there's a really great piece on The Atlantic that was posted this morning from a sociologist about the effect of the seizing of the oligarchs' assets that is an underappreciated effectiveness tool, because part of being an oligarch and having ostentatious wealth is showing it off. And if you can't do that, then that is a huge loss of status and prestige. And so now we're seeing these Russian tycoons and like these guys who are close to Putin calling publicly for the war to end, not because they're good people, but because they want their stuff back. Right. And, ultimately, it doesn't matter why you do the right thing. It matters that you do it. And so let's hope that Putin sees the writing on the wall, and that he, I don't think he's going to, but let's hope he pulls back and quits before, while there's still time.
Yeah. And I mean, the sanctions and all the economic push on the oligarchs, it's designed basically to, like you said, kind of push maybe them to say, whoa, maybe even get Putin out of power. I don't think it's going to happen. And as far as Biden, I mean, you can't win as Biden, because I think he has done a lot, and he's also been patient and very, forward in his verbiage. I mean, he was saying it before they invaded that it was going to happen, even when Ukraine was saying it wasn't, so he was like, no, this is coming and we need to be prepared. But then you have criticisms where people are like, why aren't we there involved in it? And then also 10 seconds later saying like, they better not get us involved. And it's like, dude, you just can't win. You just can't win. It's so difficult. Now,
yeah, and at the end of the day, man, like while we can stand with them, in principle and spirit, and send, support monetarily and with military technology, like at the end of the day, Ukraine is not a NATO country.
Right.
And so are we willing to accept the invitation? Because like we would not be starting World War III, but we would be accepting the invitation to start World War III
right
at this time. And like, I think that restraint is called for.
Yeah.
And now if they invade a NATO country, that all chips are off, and like, we're going to be moving to the bomb shelters. It's going to be terrible.
And that could happen. And it's pretty scary. And, what's really scary also is to watch a lot of the Republicans continue to play footsie with Putin. You heard Donald Trump, right as it first was beginning, the invasion was beginning, call Putin a genius. And then, there's people that have criticized Trump for that. But this happens time and time again where they'll criticize him. And then a couple weeks later, when the followers and whatnot, they don't like the criticisms, they just kind of slide away and they don't do anything about it. It's like no one wants to hold this guy accountable. And it's just so obvious how in bed he is with Putin, with Trump and Putin. I don't understand what is going on behind the scenes, but it's just obvious he's got a hard on for him.
Well, I think a more interesting story, right, are the Republicans who don't do that. And so, my first big campaign was President Obama's reelection campaign in 2012. I said a lot of choice things about Mitt Romney at that time. I made fun of him for saying that Russia was our main enemy in the world when he said that in that debate. I made fun of that a lot. And you know what? Mitt Romney was right. I will admit it, that I was wrong and Mitt Romney was right, and that he is a Republican who's standing up in the moment. Mike Pence has said there is no room in the Republican Party for Putin apologists. Obviously, that's not factually true because there's a bunch of them there. But, I think that we look at the downfall of what used to at least see themselves as the party of personal responsibility as they go farther into the tank for Trump. It's scary to think about how some of those things that we're seeing, around the world could happen here. And that the best evidence of that is the insurrection and treason that happened on January 6th. The only time in American history when the peaceful transfer of power was threatened. And I think that every candidate for every office in this nation should be forced to answer about their beliefs about that question. And that if you think that that is legitimate political discourse, I'm sorry, but that's treason, and that we have laws that prevent people who've committed treason from running for office.
Yeah,
and it's not acceptable.
I've been asked many times why I don't interview local Republicans. And first of all, I've tried. And second of all, I would literally only have two questions. The first question would be about climate change. And the second would be about January 6th. And so the conversation would go nowhere, So I'm like, what's the point? I'd like to have some conversations with people talking about similarities and things that we can agree on, but those are, as for candidates, for candidates for governor, for example, that's all I would want to talk about, because it's like, once we can't get past that, then it's a deal breaker. So now, with all of this stuff about Biden and the way that he's handled or discussed and talked about Russia and the invasion of Ukraine, the timing was probably pretty good for Biden that the State of the Union was planned. And I watched a little bit of it. I was doing some stuff, so I caught a lot of highlights, and then I read some stuff and I tried to listen to more of it later. But I watched some of the coverage afterwards, and the mainstream media was really trying hard to push the narrative that some of Biden's speech may be unpopular with progressives as he tries to unite the country. What were your thoughts on that?
Well, I don't, that's not what I took away from the speech. I think that the high points of the speech were, he started out by talking about how we need to stand united in the face of authoritarian expansion, that we need to stand united in support of Ukraine against Russia. And then he outlined a 4-point unity agenda that literally everyone I know agrees with. I don't know anybody who does not agree with these ideas, and that they are: 1, dealing with the opioid epidemic; 2, increasing the support and for mental health services for children; 3 was increasing the support and medical services for veterans; and 4 was doing advanced research projects for cancer with the goal of curing cancer. Like, I think everyone agrees with stopping the opioid epidemic, helping kids with their mental health, helping veterans, and curing cancer. Like that's like the most unifying principles I can possibly think of. And so I don't get the hate about what he disappointed somebody. I mean, people look to the State of the Union as I think people look to it for more than it is. It's like what's in it and what's not in it, and that we should all have a take about it. And like, maybe people should just take a step back and look at what was presented. And I think that, again, in a context of that we are fighting against authoritarian expansion abroad and, treasonous insurrection at home, trying to reach out to people who don't agree and work on the things that we do agree about is a really solid move. That is what I would expect somebody who's good enough at politics to be president of the United States, that they would seize this moment in order to bring us together, instead of use an address that is on national television to do points of division and try to tear us apart. Like that's what Trump did. And that was stupid that he did it that way. And so I do not believe that Biden choosing not to throw red meat to the base is in any way shunning them. I think that that's treating them with respect, because no matter where you are on that progressive to moderate Democrat spectrum, I think that everybody whose opinion I care about matters, that everyone thinks that we need to stand united against the rise of authoritarianism, period. That is the number one issue in the world today. It is the number one issue in foreign policy, and it is the number one issue in domestic policy as well. And so if we can't all do that, then why don't we just give up?
Right.
I'm not going to give up, but that we need to be able to stand united against authoritarianism, period.
So obviously he received, high praise for the speech. I read that his approval rating jumped 8%. It's up to like 47%, which is still pretty low.
Whoa.
But yeah, I saw that.
8%.
Yeah, that was pretty substantial.
Is a lot. That's awesome.
And you can't put too much bearing. You can't put too much bearing on just like Facebook comment sections. But I was scrolling at all. But I was scrolling through, and one after another, where this is the kind of speech we needed. Where this is just from average people, where they're saying like we needed to bring people together as much as possible. I know it's impossible, but Biden was trying to do that. Was trying to unite the people, was trying to be the president of all Americans. And I that's, from the little bit that I did see, that's what I saw. And I know that that's Biden's goal. I want to talk about the comments he made about the defund the police. And actually he literally quote said, no, we want to fund the police. But before I do, I want to have a little side note. You had mentioned children's mental health, and the University of Oregon did something pretty awesome this week. Yeah. They purchased Concordia University up in Portland, which was defunct. They had closed because of COVID and never reopened. They went online, and then they just were like, we're gonna cut our losses and we're gonna shut down. And so Connie and Steve Ballmer. Steve Ballmer is the owner of the Clippers. People know him from Microsoft. Connie Ballmer, his wife, this was her baby from what I've been told. She's an alumni of the university. They dropped $450 million into create a fund that would give scholarships. So an adornment or whatever it's called. So like it would create scholarships for students to study children's mental and behavioral health up in Portland at the Concordia location, which will now be called, I don't know the exact title, but it's the University of Oregon owns it now.
Yeah.
And it's huge. And it sounds like they got it for, I'm not sure if I'm supposed to say this because I did talk to someone off the record a little bit, but I did get a number that they bought it for, and I think it's been reported. It was $60 million for the location, which is pennies on the dollar for 23 acres of educational buildings that are already there and ready to go. You know, and it's a lot of money. It is a lot of money, but
it's a lot of money, and that it's, you know, the price of, if you're going to turn that money into condos is one thing versus having a public good in the purpose, right? So like, I mean, that's factored into the purchase price as well.
And it was a benefactor. It's not like it was taxpayers. It was a benefactor, you know, Connie and Steve Ballmer. So I'm really excited about that. So I wanted to at least touch on that's really cool. It's going to be the first of its kind in the country studying children's behavioral health. It's really great. You know,
big kudos to the Ballmer family for doing that. And, you know, Connie Ballmer's been on the board of trustees at UO. And so you may know this, but before I worked at Emergence, and then before I worked for Hillary Clinton, and before I still worked for Emergence, and then before I was the campaign manager for Senator Beyer, I worked at the Children's Farm Home in Corvallis as a skills trainer. And so essentially like a floor staff in psychiatric residential treatment for teenagers. And so I spent a lot of time and had a lot of harrowing situations and a lot of heartbreak and a lot of nightmares around mental health for teenagers, at least. And so that I know for a fact that is going to make a huge difference. And so I'm so happy to I'm so happy that happened, and that I have thanks in my heart for the Ballmers, and it makes me really proud to be an alumni of the University of Oregon.
Yeah, and the U of O. There's a lot of things lately that I have major criticisms of the U of O. This is a shining moment for them. I was really happy about it. So now back to the State of the Union address. The thing with Biden that I think got a lot of attention, and maybe the media was trying to say, oh, this is going to be unpopular with progressives, was that he literally came out and said, I do not support the defund the police. In fact, we, quote, need to fund the police. What do you think that means?
Well, I mean, I think that it is a dose of reality that is the position of a substantial majority of Americans, including me. Like, let's be clear, like, I also do not want to defund the police at all. I think that that's ridiculous. And especially if we take it from that national level down to the local, here in Lane County, we have a systemic, for decades, underinvestment in law enforcement that has resulted in, you know, rampant criminal behavior. If you ever look on Lane County mugshots, you know that. And that it's, you know, we don't have enough police officers in Eugene. We don't have enough in Springfield. We don't have enough sheriff deputies, and that we don't have enough capacity at the jail. Tom Turner, who was two sheriffs ago, Sheriff Harold now, Sheriff Trapp before him, Sheriff Turner before that. Tom Turner was a Democrat. And he told me that at the time, after the jail levy had passed, the first jail levy, so we got up to, you know, 200 some jail beds, that Lane County at that time had 10% of the average number of jail beds for a community of our size. So 350, 400,000 people. That we have 10% of the number of jail beds. That is the average. And so that, I mean, that's one example. When I served on the Eugene Civilian Review Board before I moved to Springfield, there were in the city of Eugene at that time, so then I know that there's been a little bit of increase in staffing, but not nearly enough. At that time, there was 193 FTEs of sworn officers for a city of 170,000 people. Where I grew up in Canton, Ohio, a city of 75,000 people, there was 175 FTEs. So the city is more than double, and the number of FTEs more is only 20. That's insane.
Yeah.
Like that, and that is what we see. I see it every day working at treatment court. I see it every day working in downtown Eugene. And so I think that Joe Biden is right about that, and that I do not know of any serious political candidate in our area anyway, who supports defunding the police.
Yeah. Well,
I don't know of any elected official or serious candidate for office that supports that, because it's unhinged, and it does not pay attention to what is going on in people's real lives. And that I think that Joe Biden is right. And I think that he is speaking to the vast majority of Americans. And I think that he is pushing back against a false and destructive narrative that right-wing media has put out about the Democrats, that somehow, because some backbench members of Congress support defunding the police, that is a party position. That's insane.
Right.
And so I don't support it. I don't know any Democrats here who are decision makers who support it, and that we support reforming the police so that they are treating all Americans and all people in our community fairly, that they are not discriminating against people who are members of communities who've been historically marginalized, that they are not using force inappropriately. And I would love to talk about this later if you want, the steps that we're taking here in Springfield to make that happen.
Yeah. And I mean, it's just bad framing from the gate, the defund the police stuff, because it was always, for most people that even were like willing to entertain the thought, they were wanting to reallocate funds. And we have cahoots in Lane County that is so instrumental in the way that we do things. And even my interview with Springfield, the new Springfield chief, Shearer, he was in total support and collaboration with cahoots. And obviously he was like, I'm not the person that's going to make the decision on funding. He's like, but I can tell you right now, there's not enough, and so we need more funding. We need to fund organizations like Cahoots, but we also have to fund the police so that there's adequate training. And like you said, that's a good time to segue into the local connection that the Register Guard just did a piece on the Springfield Advisory Committee recommendations on police oversight. It sounds like the committee is recommending creating a police oversight commission. And Chief Shearer and I discussed this when I interviewed him, that he opposed the commission because the department accountability was the responsibility of the chief, which I definitely was like, whoa, that was my ears perked at that moment. And I learned from it is what I'm saying. I'm not saying I was like totally against it. I just was not necessarily expecting that answer. So first of all, for the average listener, they may not understand. They may not have even gotten this deep into this interview if they're not interested. But what's the difference between a committee and a commission?
Well, it's the name, right? Like that there are different police oversight structures that can be set up. My experience about this issue is based on the fact that before I moved to Springfield, I served on the Eugene Civilian Review Board, which is the police oversight committee in Eugene. I served for 5 years. I was vice chair for 1 year and I was chair for a year. So like I have had a lot of experience with this. And that I agree with Chief Shearer that the discipline needs to be in the purview of the chief, that it needs to be in the chain of command, and that the chief is the ultimate arbiter of, whether an allegation is sustained or not, and what is going to be the remedy for that. I think that does have to be the way that it is. And so the way that the city of Eugene set this up, and I think that Eugene has the best model in the nation for this, by the way. Wow. So in addition to Cahoots, the Eugene there's 3 different groups involved in the police oversight. There's, on the one hand, the police department who goes out and they do their job, and that when complaints are generated, either through the process of people filing complaints, or whether it is, one of the big good developments in Springfield is that we're starting to use a software, and I think it's IA Pro. I don't want to be misquoted on the name of it, but a software that allows the command staff to like track what is going on, like how many uses of force a specific officer has, or how like in pretty much real time, like how that's going. And that way internal complaints can be generated as well, if that there's something that doesn't line up about, the report on the incident that happened. And so Eugene, as that was implemented in Eugene, there went from being mostly external reports and very few internal reports to the other way around, to like, a moderate number of external reports, but a lot of internally generated reports of misconduct, because that we have this tool that tracks it and we know that it's not right. And so what will happen then will be if there's a complaint, there will be an investigation into the complaint. It'll be referred to internal affairs. Internal affairs would do an investigation and turn in their investigation and their recommendation to that. If it's a patrol officer, they turn it into the sergeant. If the investigation against a sergeant, they turn it into a lieutenant. If the investigation into a lieutenant, they turn it into a captain. If the investigation into a captain, they turn it into the chief. And that all of the officers in that officer's chain of command have the opportunity to review the investigation and make a recommendation. And here's what Eugene does. And then that's pretty normal. We could decide to do that in Springfield today. Here's what is different. Eugene employs a police auditor. And I think that this is the trick, and it's expensive, but it's really worth it, is that the police auditor, and this is we want to go down to like our branches of government, right? And so in a city like Springfield or Eugene that has a city council manager model, that the city council and the mayor is the legislative branch of government. Even the mayor is part of the legislative branch because they're a part of the city council, and that the city manager is the head of the executive branch. Now, that means that the head of the executive branch is not an elected official. They're an appointed official. They're hired to do the job. And that if the auditor was in the chain of command of the, like, because who's above the chief? Who is the chief's commanding officer, essentially? It's the city manager. And so if the city manager hires the police auditor, it puts the city manager into conflict, because if the chief recommends one thing and the auditor recommends something else, there's a conflict there. And so the way that Eugene got around that, and this is brilliant, and I really think that Springfield should consider this, is they amended the charter to allow the police auditor to be one of 3 employees who are hired directly by the city council and report directly to them. Those 3 employees in Eugene are the city manager, the police auditor, and the municipal court judge, which is the 3rd branch of government, the judicial branch. Right. And so having a police auditor who is not in the same chain of command as the chief provides truly independent oversight, because the auditor is not accountable to the chief or the city manager. They are accountable to the city council. And so what would happen in Eugene, again, so back to the narrative where, sergeant has recommended, lieutenant's recommended, captain has recommended, the auditor, who has he's not a sworn officer, he has a different set of investigative skills, has been participating in this investigation the whole time. He can make a recommendation to the chief as well. And I would say 2/3 of the time it was the same, but 1/3 of the time the recommendation was different. And then the police chief, using all of that information from both his chain of command sources and from the independent police auditor, is able to make a determination about, did the conduct occur and what should the discipline be, right? I think that system has a lot of good checks and balances, but it also maintains the chain of command for the chief, because at the end of the day, if there's not one person in charge, there's no one in charge. And so a police department, you have to have somebody who's in charge, that you have to have someone who is ultimately accountable. As we found out when, the last police chief was forced to retire based on malfeasance in the department, that someone has to be accountable when that happens. Right. And then going back to the model we use in Eugene, right? That after the police chief has made their determination, the case can be reviewed by the Civilian Review Board. And this is where I was at. And that the Civilian Review Board is a broad group of citizens. There's 7 on the Eugene version. I don't know if Springfield will want to do 7 or what, but that they have the opportunity to review the completed cases, to provide feedback to the chief and to the police department and to the community based on what are the community's concerns with this case. And so there are several cases where the Civilian Review Board was more critical, I think, than the police department, and that changed the policy of the Eugene Police Department, because the third part of that model is what Springfield has is that police advisory committee. Eugene's version of that is called the Eugene Police Commission. And the Eugene Police Commission does not look at individual cases or incidents. In fact, that's totally outside of their purview. What they do is that they look at the policies of the police department and they propose changes. And again, at the end of the day, it's the chief makes the decision, but he makes it with that input, and that community input is very valuable. And so a really good example that changed policing in Eugene, absolutely, is that when I joined the Civilian Review Board was when it was in 2013, and that was when we first started hearing about de-escalation as a needed tactic. And so many of our cases were about incidents where the actual use of force was not against policy, and it was like, given the circumstances at the moment of the force, it was the appropriate level of force. However, in the lead up to that moment, many opportunities to de-escalate the situation were not taken. And so month after month, our Civilian Review Board would talk about de-escalation. Like, we need to de-escalate. Like, this is another case where that could have been de-escalated. I want to give huge kudos to Steve McIntyre, who was one of my mentors on that board. He's a vice president over at Selco. He served on that board, I think, for 10 years. I mean, a long time. And that he was the champion of de-escalation. And eventually that de-escalation made its way to the police commission. And now it is the policy of the Eugene Police Department that officers are expected to de-escalate situations. And now that if they do not do that, right? I mean, some situations can't be de-escalated, right? But if they do not do that when they could have, that is now grounds for an administrative investigation and consequences when it wasn't 10 years ago.
Right.
And so like that model, I acknowledge that it is slow. It is not built for rapid response, but also it is built with checks and balances in mind, and that it is built with professionalism in mind, and ultimately any kind of like review process. If the officers and the union do not believe that they will be treated fairly, that the incentive is for them to not participate. And so anything that we do in Springfield, it has to be fair. And not fair, like we're going to come out. I mean, so many times I hear accountable this all the time. And so many times what people mean by being accountable, what they're really talking about is revenge. And that's not, we can't have that. No. It needs to be fair to the officers. It needs to be fair to people who complain, that there shouldn't be retaliation against somebody who complains, even if their complaint ultimately is found to be within policy. It needs to be fair to the chief and to the city manager and the elected officials, because they have to like administer the policy, and that it needs to be fair for everyone involved, right? Like it's I'm a Rotarian, man, like the 4-way test. Is it fair to all concerned? And is it the truth? And if it's not both of those things, that it's probably not a really good mechanism to get true accountability. It's more about revenge. Right. And so I'm in agreement with the chief about the idea that the discipline should not be left to appointed community members. Discipline has got to stay with the chief. And that I would be very hesitant to put volunteers who are not trained police officers in a position where they are deciding essentially guilt or innocence, and what will the penalty for the infraction be. I think that's a recipe for disaster.
No, I agree. And especially because it does change hands, and you don't want people on the extremes to be the ones making those decisions that are the kind of people that might want to seek revenge with those kind of decisions. I really encourage anybody, if they haven't listened to the episode I did with Springfield Chief Shearer, it was great. Just hearing what he had to say, we covered a lot. So you should go back and listen to that. And a lot of the stuff that we talked about is actually coming to fruition. So it's really interesting. So we got to move on. There's an election coming up, and it's massive. And I know that the turnout in the primary elections nationally and locally are both very small, and we need to get people on board to use their voice. Some of the big ones, I mean, we've got the governor's race. We've got 4th Congressional District, which is Peter DeFazio's seat, and we'll talk about that at length. We got Lane County Commissioner races. There's some city council races, which I'm not going to talk about a lot today, but I am going to have Mark Molina on, who's running for Springfield City Council, and we'll talk about it more at that time. So let's just start off with governor. I honestly know so little about what's happening in this race, other than that Nick Kristof, New York Times, I believe, writer, that was basically deemed ineligible, appealed it, lost his appeal. He's not going to be running. I didn't think that was a good idea for him to be the candidate because of that fact, because he was living in New York 2 years ago. So he's not really living in Oregon, even though he's got a history, and I've heard the arguments, but he's not eligible, so let's not even really get into that too much. But what is happening in this race? I mean, I've been able to find very little.
That's a good question, man. Not a lot of people are hearing about it. And so, Kristof was DQ'd. There are, I think, several other candidates who are not serious contenders. That the two candidates, and I don't know what's going on in the Republican primary, except that the family values Republican candidate was outed as that he and his wife were members of a swingers club in Portland. So that's the only thing I know about the Republicans.
Which is fine if that's what they want to do, but they're hypocrites. So
it's kind of on brand for the family values wing of the Republican Party, right? But in the Democratic primary, there's two candidates who can win. There's Speaker of the House, Tina Kotek, and there's State Treasurer, Tobias Reed. And that no one really knows a lot about the race. There's not a lot of information out there about it. And so, I think that the most interesting dynamic of this race is that Speaker Kotek has been raking in endorsements and money from unions, from progressive allied identity groups. A lot of the really important parts of the Democratic coalition are endorsing her campaign, and rightly so. She's been very effective as Speaker of the House. And that one would think that that amount of institutional muscle would put her way ahead, and she's not. And that is the defining factor in the race, I think, at this time, is that she should be way in front, but Tobias Reed is still within striking distance. Tobias Reed just got his first very high-profile endorsement of former Democratic Governor Barbara Roberts, who is like the gold standard for the conscience of the party endorsement. That she is, I think, probably the most popular living Democrat in the state. In our part of the state, DeFazio is probably more popular, but overall statewide, Barbara Roberts is beloved. And that her endorsing Tobias Reed is a big deal for his campaign. And it's a big deal for, voters who want to have a close race that they can decide between the candidates. I think that, another interesting dynamic of that race is that Tobias Reed is the state treasurer. He's won 2 statewide elections, and he served 10 years in the House of Representatives. And that he is the outsider candidate because of those big endorsements, and because it is perceived, and whether or not this is true, I don't know, that Speaker Kotek would represent more of a continuation of Governor Brown, where Tobias Reed has the opportunity to do some things a little bit differently. That is a perception that I hear. I have not decided who I'm going to vote for. I'm not endorsing in that race. And so I think that it's incumbent on Democrats. It's, the information is not getting out there in the way that I would have expected. And so I'm hoping that there will be more coming out. Speaker Kotek is actually doing her big field launch today. It's multi-site around the state. She is in Bend, but the Eugene version of that event is happening, I think, actually right at this moment, happening at the DPLC office. And so the DPL, just to be clear, the Democratic Party of Lane County does not take positions in partisan primaries. That we believe that the primary is the endorsement, and that we will support whoever wins the primary in the general election. And so, our hosting Tina Kotek's event at our office does not indicate an endorsement. It's just our candidates can use our office to launch events if they
and
set
that's
it
the
up.
same with my show. I mean, just because I have someone on doesn't mean that it's an endorsement.
Yeah.
It's literally just trying to give them an opportunity to be heard. Now, it's funny because a lot of times people criticize elections, the process for it being too long. So maybe this time you're not seeing as much coverage. It's designed because I know that in the primaries, the people that tend to vote are the people that are more engaged. And then in the general, you'll have kind of all the other people involved. So after the primary, now you need to vote, guys. Whoever's listening, definitely turn out and vote and educate yourself, and Google these candidates. I mean, that's when you get your ballot, you can Google the candidates and you can read their platforms. That's really important this May 17th. But also, we're going to find more and more about once the primaries are decided and the general election. But there is seats sometimes that if you don't vote in a primary, if they get 51%, it's over. So I don't know about.
Well, and one of the most important seats that I've heard even less about than the governor is the race for labor commissioner.
Right.
Val Hoyle, the incumbent labor commissioner, is running for Congress. And so she is not running for re-election for labor commissioner. And that that's a race where I think that there's 2 candidates that can win. And full disclosure that I have endorsed a candidate in that race. It's a nonpartisan race where, the 2 top candidates are Casey Kula, who's a county commissioner in Yamhill County, and Christina Stevenson, who is a civil rights attorney. And that I've endorsed Christina Stevenson in that race, and that she is an amazing champion for our values. That she and I were both recruited in I think it was the very first national candidate training for the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. And so she and I attended that training and watched that event in Washington, D.C., along with, from Oregon, it was Christina Stevenson and me and Senator James Manning, Representative Teresa Alonso Leon. So that was a real good delegation from Oregon. But some other people who attended that training that you may know of is Representative Ilhan Omar from Minnesota, Representative Nanette Berrigan from California. That there have just been a lot of really good people who've come up through the Progressive Change Campaign Committee. And so that's how Christina and I first got hooked up, and that we have been working together ever since. And that I think that she's the best choice for labor commissioner, which is why I broken from my previous practice and endorsed her in this race.
Right. Now, you had mentioned the 4th Congressional District. This is Peter DeFazio's seat. He's retiring. And you had mentioned Val Hoyle. Would you say that she's considered the front runner at this point?
I mean, I think that it would be dishonest to not acknowledge that Val Hoyle is a heavy front runner.
Yeah, labor secretary. And so
she's way out. She's way out in front in terms of money, in terms of her coalition is much better defined. And that Val's running a great campaign. That I am very impressed. And I'll just full disclosure, I'm not endorsing any of these candidates. Sure. But as an observer, I'm very impressed with Val's campaign, that she has earned the endorsement of Congressman DeFazio, which is a big deal.
Pretty big.
She's earned the endorsement of Senator Jeff Merkley, which is also a big deal.
Yeah.
And that she is hitting all the right notes right now. So I would say that it's Val versus the field. And if we had points on it, it'd be Val and probably a couple of touchdowns.
Yeah. So I did really enjoy the interview that I had with Andrew Calick. He was very impressive with, he's very well versed, very well spoken. I'm looking forward to next week. I'll be interviewing Doyle Canning in this race, and she has done some great work on the pipeline on the coast, and she's really gotten some support. She's very progressive, but she's gotten a lot of support from people across the aisle with that work that she's done. So I'm looking forward to hearing what she has to say. I really, really, really encourage everybody listening to at least check out those candidates, because they're awesome. So let's talk about Lane County Commissioner races in East Lane County. Go ahead.
Let's go back to Congress for just a minute. That I think that it's really interesting. Val is a known candidate, that she has not universal, but she has very high name recognition. People know who she is. She's been on their ballot before. She's been on a statewide ballot twice, for Secretary of State in a race that she did not win, and Labor Commissioner in a race that she did. And so I think that the challenge for Andrew Calick, who I also agree is very impressive and has some really good ideas, and Doyle Canning, who ran in the district the last time, is really how do they get their name out? How do they get their ideas out to the broader amount of people who aren't the kind of people who sign up for email lists from candidates and politicians? I know that Doyle in particular has a great opportunity, because last time, a lot of people DeFazio, that's it. I'm not willing to even hear anybody else out. To be clear, I was one of those people. Sure. DeFazio's on the ballot, I'm voting for him, period. And so now that there is a wider range of people who might be open to her message. And so I think that, Andrew, this is his first campaign. And so I think that, I think I'm very interested to see what happens. And I think that they both have a really great opportunity, and that just because Val is ahead doesn't mean that somebody can't catch up, just like we're seeing in that race with the governor's race. But there's one thing I do want to touch on, which is that there are competing narratives coming out of the campaigns, that Val Hoyle's one of the narratives from her campaign. And this is not about any candidates. This is about the nature of the district. And I think that this is worth remarking on, that from Val's campaign and from Peter DeFazio's campaign previously, you are hearing that our district is swingier than it looks. There are people here that, there are Democrats here who vote Republican for a number of reasons, that there are not the kind of suburbs in this district where there are people who are still registered Republicans who now vote for Democrats in that partisan shift. And so both Val Hoyle and Peter DeFazio have pointed this out for years. And I've had conversations with them back to my first year as party chair in 2015 about this topic. When I think that that's worth noting. You're seeing from some of the newer candidates this narrative that, because this district is plus 8D, it is a safe Democratic seat. And so you should not worry about electability and vote for the progressive. And I want to address that in that, I don't necessarily believe in electability arguments. I believe in that on the presidential level, but not as much on the congressional level. If you agree with one of these candidates, Doyle or Andrew Calick or one of the other candidates, even on their policies and their ideas, you should vote for them. I think that they're in a partisan primary, because electability is who can win the election. The only way to know who's electable is to run the election and see who wins. And so it's not like electability is not a like foretold prophecy of who can win. But I will caution people very sternly that that view of this as a safe Democratic district is wrong.
Right.
It is wrong. It is not true that there are a ton of people who are out there who are registered Democrats who will not vote for our candidates. And the only Democrat that they would vote for on their ballot was Peter DeFazio. And I know that because I have literally called those people. I have spoken to them, and that I've spoken to them for years, and that they have become more hostile to us as the years go on. But because they haven't moved, why would they re-register? That they don't necessarily care to vote in the primary, but in the general election, these are those, much discussed crossover DeFazio Trump voters.
Yeah.
And so I think to take that dynamic for granted and just to think this is a safe Democratic district, so do whatever you want, that is folly. It's not true.
And the Republicans have, Scarlatos, who's got name recognition, and he was on Dancing with the Stars. So that's dangerous.
Yeah, I mean that when your chief intellectual accomplishment in your life was Dancing with the Stars, maybe you shouldn't run for Congress.
Yeah. But
also don't defraud charities about veterans. There's like a circle in hell that is for people who defraud charities that serve veterans. I'll just put that out there.
But it is very important too. Like you had said, DeFazio had so much support from people that would be willing to vote for Trump, And so that is not small, because that can definitely, when you lose that name and that experience, it's going to be interesting to see how it falls. We do have to move on because we got to talk about Lane County Commissioner. In East Lane County, we've got Heather Buck is the Democratic candidate. Joe Berney in Springfield. Joe Berney is awesome. Joe Berney, I feel like, is reflective of Oregon's through and through. He's pro-worker, has worked to keep people in their homes as well as help the homeless. And I loved when I got to talk to him on the podcast. So again, if you want to learn more about Joe Berney, you can listen to that. Heather Buck, I met at the fairgrounds. I volunteered at the DPLC tent the day of the shooting. That was an interesting day. And I met her, and I don't know a lot about her, but she was extremely warm. She was kind. I was really honored that she knew who I was. But, so it's cool that
she's a listener to the podcast.
I've been hearing that.
We've talked about the podcast before.
Yeah, and it means a lot to me that I'm included in the conversation, and that
you should call her and see if she'll come on.
I've been trying to reach out. I'll talk to you off air about a good way to reach her. I tried through Facebook, and some people do and some people don't with Facebook Messenger, but I wouldn't blame her for not. So, yeah, so that race, Joe, let's talk about Springfield with Joe Berney and why it's so important that people at least, educate themselves on Joe Berney, because he's great. So what do you have to say about that?
Well, yeah, Joe Berney is great. That's what I have to say about it.
Exactly.
So Springfield is my district. That Joe Berney is my county commissioner, and I am very pleased with what he's been able to accomplish in 4 years. That his steady hand at the wheel during the wildfires and let me take that back. Heather was chair during the wildfires. Joe was chair during the COVID recovery year. That he did a really great job. That he is the champion for the community benefits agreement, which is a game-changing idea. This is probably out of all ideas in politics, the one that I support the most, and that Joe Berney is the champion for, which is the idea that when we are doing public contracting, where the government is using its purchasing power to buy stuff, we should be focusing on more than just what is the lowest price, but we should be focused on when we are purchasing something, right? The government should be an ethical consumer. And so is the company we're purchasing from, when this mostly happens in capital construction, are they paying a living wage? Are they offering families of workers health insurance? Are they engaged in, sustainable practices, right? Are they hiring local businesses? All of those things about the ways that the government can use its money to reinvest in the community, I think is game-changing and very powerful. Joe Berney not only got this through the Lane County Commission and championed it and got it passed, which is a model for all of the other districts in Lane County, and now other districts are working on their own version of community benefits agreements, including, 4J Lane Community College. I hope next year we hear more about that in Springfield. Not only that, he helped author a law that was carried, the bill was carried by Senator James Manning to make this available to people statewide.
Yeah.
Which is amazing, because the main argument against community benefits agreements was that there was some pearls clutched about, well, is this even legal? Do we have to use the lowest bid by state law? Well, it was legal. You didn't have to do that. But now the law says affirmatively that these community benefits agreements are legal. And I think that every Democrat should support these, and that every jurisdiction that is controlled by Democrats should pass them, that they're a huge deal. And that Joe Berney, he did not invent this, but in Oregon, he is the one who's driving the conversation from right here in Springfield. And that is a man who is worth reelecting and supporting. And so I think I promised him that I would knock on, 500 or 1,000 doors. I don't remember what I said, but I'm excited to do it. I'm excited to tell people about this.
His opponent has a massive billboard on 126. The only thing that I like about the billboard is that Rick Dancer's stupid ass billboard is gone. So I will say
that they have the same haircut though.
They do. Rick Dancer, that's all he has, is he has his silver fox image. And Rick Dancer no longer lives here, and that's something that we should dance and celebrate about. But anyways, yeah, he's got an opponent. Joe Berney does. I think David Lovell is his name, that is a commercial real estate guy. Is that right? Or is it more residential?
Yeah, he's like a developer type.
There's a lot of money, and I don't know a lot about it, and I really don't want to give it too much energy. We don't have a ton of time, but yeah, I just think Joe Berney's incredible. Anyone listening, go listen to that episode I did with him, because we talked about Senate Bill 420 that he had passed, or he had authored or helped write, and then James Manning was able to push through. And it's amazing, and it's great for workers, and it's great for the state, and it's so, Joe Berney was talking about how he was so inspired by Bernie Sanders' campaign, and he looked through and he's like, Bernie for Bernie. And he looked through and he's like, how can I make these things happen for Oregon? And these things that Bernie Sanders was about are popular like a DeFazio. They're popular across the board. That's what people don't understand. You talked about electability. Bernie Sanders was somebody that people that are outside of the typical party spheres were super interested in some of the things he was saying. It's like, I always talk about it. It's like whenever I'm debating, in the barbershop and I'm talking politics with people, I'll say stuff like, I just want healthcare. Like, come on now. Like, we're talking about, verb semantics and all this other stuff. I just want healthcare, and everyone wants healthcare, and there's a lot of things people agree on. But Joe Berney's great, so check him out. And Heather Buck is great as well in East Lane County. I'm going to try to reach out to her and see if I can get her on before the primary. So yeah, Chris Wig, the chair of the Democratic Party of Lane County. The last thing I want to talk about briefly, not get super deep into it, is that the mask mandate is going to be lifted March 12th officially. Springfield schools and 4J schools have voted to, the school boards have voted to follow suit and to, follow what the state is doing. I want people to understand that this is basically the government's kind of stepping back as far as their role. It is up to the individual now to protect yourself. There's information there with vaccine, with K95 masks that fit your face. If you want to protect yourself, you can. And so the people that choose to keep wearing a mask, let's really not shame them. Let's support that, because that means that they have a reason that they're doing that, whether they don't feel safe themselves or they're trying to protect one of their immunocompromised loved ones at home. That it's important that we allow people to just do what's good for them. We've had 2 years of a lot of, division on this. And at this point, I think it's time. I think it's time for the government to step back and let the people make their decisions, because there's enough information. Get your booster shots, and then you're at so much lower risk of being hospitalized. I'm scared a little bit. I'll be honest, because I have not had COVID. And so, to the best of my knowledge, I guess I could have been asymptomatic. I don't have any reason to think I have been. And so I probably will end up getting it, because I work with the college kids that are not going to be wearing masks starting the 12th. And so I'll probably have to miss work, and I hopefully don't end up, I don't think I'll end up in the hospital, but I probably will have to miss work,
Well, you got your booster shot, right?
I did. But I've got friends that have gotten booster shots that actually, I don't know if I can say that. I know I have friends that have had two shots at least, that have had serious bouts with COVID recently. So I don't know what's changing next week completely, other than the fact that hospitalization rates are down, and that there's the information and there's protections there, and there's treatment there also. So
yeah, I think that you're right, that it is, it's time for, we are a nation that supports, at least we say that we support individual responsibility, and that a public health pandemic is not the time to assert that, but that we are now at a place where those vaccines and booster shots are available, masks are readily available. We know what we need to do to protect ourselves and our families. And so I think that the governor is right on, and the CDC is right on in terms of, we've reached the point where people aren't going to do it anymore.
Right.
And so that, I would also, share your call to, let's be kind to each other. If somebody wants this whole time, all of the anti-maskers and the anti-vaxxers that are saying, well, we just want it to be our choice. Well, it's going to be your choice now. So I don't think that there's any anti-maskers and anti-vaxxers who probably watch your show. But if there are,
there's a few.
Let's be nice to people, man.
Yeah.
Like that we're going to do it your way now.
Yeah,
so
right.
Be kind and be chill about it.
And hopefully it's not like last time. Hopefully it's not another variant pops up and then we're like, oops, but I think that time will tell. I do still want people to stay 6 feet from me. I really appreciate that. You and I have become friends now, and I think that we've maintained a 3 mile distance at all times. And so
I think most of the time, probably.
No,
yeah.
I just have. It's funny because I've done a lot of this stuff with Zoom, and I really haven't done any of the in-person stuff since I became a precinct committee person. I haven't been to anything in person, and I know talking to Irene Henjum, she's always like so gung ho about getting in person. So I know that it's coming, and I'm excited too. I joke about that, but I work in a job where I have to touch people, so I'm definitely in my personal life. I'm like, I just want to be alone, because I do it all day long at work, where I'm cutting people's hair, and I love what I do. But yeah, so March 12th, key date is the end of the mask mandate. It's actually technically 11:59 on the 11th. So if you want to be crazy, you could take that thing off at 11:45 and be like, woohoo, I'm wild. Right. No, but also May 17th is the primary. What is the deadline passed to register? What is the date?
No.
Okay.
The deadline is to register is, I think, I don't have that in front of me, but it's in the end of April.
Okay.
Usually it's right before the ballots go out. So you can still register. You can still change your address if you are a non-affiliated voter and that you want to vote in one of the party primaries. All you have to do to be able to vote is just re-register as a member of that party. And that if you don't like us, I think, as a chair of the Democratic Party, I obviously am a strong Democrat. And it is my belief that to know us is to love us. And I think that if you join us, you won't want to go back. But even if you don't like us and you do want to go back, then all you got to do is re-register again. It's easy, and you can do it online. Yeah. If you are already registered to vote, you can change your registration online. Yeah. And that is easy. And that because it is that easy is why I support strongly closed primaries.
Yeah. So if you haven't registered, or if you want to change your party, you can still do that. Go online, just literally Google register to vote in Oregon, or you go to the Secretary of State's website. And it's really easy.
My vote Oregon.
My vote Oregon. So it's super easy to do. And the primary is May 17th. So you should get on that today if you haven't registered, or if you've moved or any of that good stuff. So Chris Wig, chair of the Democratic Party, thank you so much for always being willing to come on and talk to me about all these crazy issues. I'm going to end this with a song. Shout out to Brandon Ferguson. I've already played the song on the podcast, but I wanted to play it again because I love this band. This band is called Thinking About You Underwater, and the reason I chose to replay it is because they're going to be doing a show at Sessions Music Hall March 18th, and they're awesome. So it's going to be a great show. So for anybody interested, that's the day after St. Patrick's Day. The track is called Delusion. This is Thinking About You Underwater with Delusion.
Fragile lives for the hell of it. I'm ahead of it. Sail away from me. And don't believe you're the hypocrite. That'll make you quit. I can guarantee. Not everyone will benefit from the dead of me. Now your head is gone. Sometimes I feel unedited. From the dead of it, save your head from me. But I don't wanna die, just to realize that I've been alive this whole damn time. Like ghosts, we went desolate cities to find broken souls, to steal dead bodies. I know my karma is in a capsule for you to take from. Don't make me the asshole. And I hope that I won't sleep, 'cause I'm a sinking ship. Brittle bones made of jealousy, broken empathy, I thought it was clear. I made an effort to sound sincere, and now I'll disappear. No dependency. Not everyone will benefit from the dead of me. Now you're very wrong. Sometimes I feel I'm cherry red. Throw me in the sea, don't you wait a bit. But I don't wanna die, just to realize that I've been alive this whole damn time. Like ghosts, we went to desolate cities to find broken souls, to steal dead bodies. I know my karma is in a capsule for you to take from. Don't make me the asshole. And I hope that I won't sleep, 'cause I'm a sinking ship. Like ghosts, we went to desolate cities to find broken souls, to steal